All right, now let's dig a bit deeper into this issue. We're joined by Kenneth A from Skadden law firm. He's also a former Associate General Counsel with the Federal Election Commission watchdog. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, let's have a look at Trump, a unique situation. And since the U.S. hasn't had a president with the size and scope of Donald Trump's portfolio, what sort of conflicts of interest are most concerning in Trump's case?
Well, they're broad and numerous, but I think the initial and primary concern are the international holdings. He's got holdings in countries that are not friendly to the U.S., in Russia, in Turkey, Azerbaijan. He's got loans with the bank in China, throughout the world. And those are the assets that I would look at first, the holdings that I would look at first in terms of conflicts of interest.
Now, as you mentioned, Trump's multinational business interests spread across a number of countries that some fear could even influence his foreign policy stances. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I think that's a legitimate concern. Even if it's not a valid point, he's going to be criticized. It's going to be a thorn in his side, because if he's taking a position with a country, you know, maybe he's taking it easy, maybe he's taking it harsh, they'll say, oh, that's not about public policy or foreign policy. That's about that company he has there. That's about that hotel or golf course. He's using this power as president on leverage for his personal holdings. This is a real problem that's going to plague throughout this presidency.
And certainly the optics wouldn't appear to be in his favor in that sort of situation.
Right.
Now, a lot of people are wondering, what are some of the checks and balances already in place in the U.S. to try and limit some of these conflicts of interest?
Well, that's the interesting point, because there are actually very strict conflict of interest laws that apply to the U.S. government executive branch, which of course he's the head of, with one exception. The president is exempted, and the vice president, because it's his view, his responsibilities are meant to be so broad. They said, well, it's going to be hard to have these laws apply to him. But we've never had a president come into office directly from business with over 500 businesses. Now, there is a provision in the Constitution that says that he, as the president, nor can anybody else in the administration, get a gift or a payment from a foreign government. And some of these businesses that he's dealing with abroad are actually owned or controlled or an arm of foreign governments. That's actually a legal issue for him.
So it sounds like we're really entering new territory when it comes to Donald Trump.
It really is at the presidential level. We've dealt with some of these issues, you know, down below, but unprecedented as far as presidential politics and presidential administration, yes.
Now, we also know that Trump wants to have his children run his empire in his stead.
Mm-hmm.
What issues could that raise?
Well, you know, if he was really going to do that, he would have to be totally separate from his children. He'd say, okay, the kids are going to run the business. First of all, it still doesn't take care of all the problems, because he still will own the business. They're just going to manage the business. And then he'd have to have no discussion, a real wall between him and his kids. And we're already talking about his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, potentially going into the administration.
Right.
He's been active in the transition period. Well, his wife is Ivanka Trump, who's going to be running some of the businesses.
Right.
No conversation, no pillow talk. It's going to be very interesting to see if they're going to do that.
Certainly a very gray area. Now, obviously, Trump isn't the first leader to come from a business background to come into power. What are some examples of other global leaders who perhaps face the same situation, and what sort of lessons could we learn?
Well, just looking in the U.S., first of all, you know, we've had wealthy presidents, President Bush first, President Bush II, President Reagan, President Bush I, President Clinton, President Bush II, all put their assets into true blind trust. Around the world, I've represented actually a man much richer than Donald Trump, and that's Mayor Bloomberg, who was the mayor of New York City. We had Silvio Berlusconi, who was the head of Italy, very wealthy man who ended up getting into some trouble. You know, this is going to be a challenge, and it needs to be taken very seriously by this incoming administration.
Now, you mentioned some of these less controversial paths, like blind trust, which do require an independent trustee.
Right.
Obviously, hard to say that when it comes to your children.
No.
And others are putting their interest into diversified holdings. So what are the biggest benefits and drawbacks of those two scenarios?
Well, in the case of President Obama, he did put his assets into index funds and widely diversified and bonds and things, and that's fine. His holdings were suitable to that. And then there were other presidents, as I just mentioned, who put them into blind trust, true blind trust, not run by family members, which doesn't qualify. That's not a blind trust, that's a seeing trust. But with independent trustees, those are very, very good vehicles. That having been said, I don't know how he actually accomplishes that with over 500 businesses. We don't really even know what's in a lot. We know about Trump Tower and Mar-a-Lago, but we don't know what these businesses are. When you look at them listed on the Federal Election Commission holdings, some of them are licensing for names, some of them may be hotels, some of them may be other investments. And we'd really have to look behind it. And Mr. Trump is not given the public his tax returns, which is part of would be helpful in seeing a little bit more transparency here, because I think transparency is going to go a long way towards resolving some of these conflicts. Otherwise, it's going to be every day, or virtually every day, another drip, drip, drip.
Indeed, Kenneth, lots to unravel there. Unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there. Kenneth Gross joining us from the Skadden law firm. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.